what's up? Welcome back to another live stream. Haven't been doing this in a while, but we're back and we're doing another live stream here on Free Will Photos. Today, we're taking a look at JPEG images and what we can do with them, how far we can push them inside of Photolab 7. Now, if you want to pick up Photolab 7, there is an affiliate link down in the description box below. There's no extra cost to you to use the link, and I do make a small commission every time you guys use my affiliate links. I'm greatly appreciative. Now, before I dive into today's lesson in Photolab, I want to say thank you to all of the supporters. We hit 3,000 subscribers in the past week here on Free Will Photos, and honestly, I can't do it without you guys. I'm humbled that you would come here and allow me to share what I know. Not that I'm some expert or super genius, but I really enjoy sharing the information that I have with the community and hopefully making it a better place. So I really appreciate you guys showing that love. Now let's go ahead and jump into the computer and take a look at Photolab 7 and JPEGs. So here we are inside of Photolab 7, and my dog is moving around in the back now. He's excited too because there's 3,000 of you decide to hit that subscribe button. Here we are in Photolab 7, and I'm working on a JPEG image purely because there's been this debate in the photography space, if you will, about do you need to shoot RAW or do you need to shoot JPEG? Now, for me personally, I shoot both RAW and JPEG on my camera. I have plenty of storage space, so it's not that big of a concern for me. However, I know that for some people, storage space is a concern, and that's why I wanted to kind of talk about JPEGs today, because I think that there is a place for JPEGs. Now, with that being said, JPEGs do have limitations, and that's what we want to figure out today. How far can we push a JPEG? Now, inside of Photolab 7, I have the JPEG image here and the RAW image to the left of it. Now, I'm not going to show you the RAW image because that's not the purpose of today's content. I'm only going to focus on the JPEG because I think that that's what we really need to discuss. Like, are JPEGs worth editing? And in my humble opinion and my personal opinion, I'm going to say yes. There's some people that'll say, nope, you absolutely must only edit RAW files, DNGs or native RAW files to the camera manufacturer that you use. So there's already some edits on here. Let me show you what this looks like without the edits. So this is the JPEG straight out of camera that we're looking at right here. And if I pull this over, you can see it does a really good job. And this is one of the things I appreciate about Photolab 7. Out of the box, I don't know if it's using AI or what it's doing. It's just making it make sense. And I like what it did to the overall photo here. You know, like when you look at the trees in the background, they're a little bit more bright. They're a little bit more vibrant. And I really appreciate that the overall image isn't as dark because the original JPEG is pretty dark. So that means it's opening up some of those shadows and getting those blacks to, kind of spread out a little bit. So I truly appreciate this. Now, let me go ahead and turn this off and we'll take a look at what it's really doing to the photo. So I'm just going to click this little active corrections button. And this is a cool feature inside of Photolab. It only shows you the things that are impacting the photo, so you can kind of focus in and figure out what's happening. All right. So if I turn off the active smart lighting, you can see it goes away. So I don't want to do that because I think that that's where a big portion of this particular image's edit is coming from. And again, this is something that's specific to Photolab 7. And if I pull this up, you can see what it's doing to the overall image. And I actually kind of like this. This is like, essentially, it's a smart or a dynamic brightening tool for your image. And on a JPEG, I could push this pretty good And I'm just now starting to get some artifacting here. Uh, let's see, let's zoom it in just a touch. Okay. So if you look over here on the left-hand side, and I think that's coming through on the YouTube compression system. If I pull this down, you can see I don't have any of those artifacts. And then if I pull this up, I'm starting to get those artifacts. Now, here's the deal when you photograph in JPEG. You have to have a good exposure right out of camera. If you don't have a good exposure out of camera, there's very few things that you can do in editing software to get a good photo. And when I say good exposure or correct exposure, that's subjective to the look you're going for. But on this particular day, it was a nice sunny day, and I just wanted to frame up this sign in between the the pillar here and the building. So in my mind, as long as I can get this exposed well and the background makes sense to the environment that I'm photographing and I'm leading the eyes up, then I'm doing okay, right? So, and these things are also exposed decently enough, not to the point where they're a point of attention, but to the point that someone could look at it and say, okay, I know what that is, and realize that that's not the focus of the overall image. However, when you come over to the smart lighting and you start to pull this up, and when you get away from, or I'm sorry, on a DNG or a RAW file, you can push this a little bit further. So the limitations to a JPEG is that you do not have complete dynamic and tonal range of an image. However, if you have good exposure out of camera, because this is the point that I wanted to make, if you have good exposure out of the camera, you can use this tool very loosely and still get some great results without having to worry about destroying your shadows, so to speak. So that is the smart lighting, the active smart lighting. Then, of course, we have selective tone. Now, if I turn this off and turn it back on, you can see what it's doing to the overall image. It's making the bright areas brighter, essentially, or at least making them stand out because there's a mid-tone adjustment, and it's pulling back on the highlights, which I think are appropriate for this particular image. Now, if I pull this back even further, you can see it's darkening that image down, and I don't want the image to be too dark. I think that it was a nice, bright, sunny day, and I want to make sure that that comes through in the overall image here. This is also boosting some shadows and midtones, and I think that that's okay. If we push up on the midtones here, you can see it makes the photo way too bright. But look at how much wiggle room I have to push this before, you know, it's not even artifacting. It doesn't look the greatest. It's not the stylistic approach that I would go for. And whenever I'm using this first little section here, the light section, I was going to call it the develop section. I spend too much time on one. Whenever I use the light section, I'm really focusing on getting my exposure the way that I want and building dynamic contrast and the lighting globally the way that I want it to be. All right. So that's kind of my take on using this particular tab, but I didn't actually set any of these. This is just what came essentially out of the box when I selected the image. Photolab 7 made its own edits, and I'm starting to appreciate this. Now, I'm not going to compare this to Brilliance AI because I think that both have a place in the photography space. But when I'm working in Photolab 7, I usually can just go straight into stylizing because I get good exposure out of camera most of the time. And this program figures it out. So this is why you can work with a JPEG inside of Photolab 7 and get some really good results straight out of the box. Now, 10 seems to be the default for the Clearview Plus, and this is essentially, for lack of better terms, it's like a dehazing slash pulling your contrast slider, and it works pretty well. Now, I don't like to crank this too high. I like to leave this pretty low. I think 10 is probably the best place for it, especially on this image. Like if I turn it off and turn it on, you can see it just makes the image pop a little bit more, makes it a little bit more crisp, and really brings those tones closer together relative to the overall lighting situation. So that's the reason I prefer using the DxO Clearview Plus. Just turning that off and on, it works great. Try it out on your own images, especially those of you who are using Photolab 7. Now we get into one of my favorite areas of any software is developing the contrast. And I love the way that Photolab kind of lays these things out here, right? Because you have contrast and then you have the tone curve. And they give you a little bit of boost to the overall global contrast. And then you have micro and fine contrast. And for this image, I'm not sure if I need any of it because I do like the way it looks by itself. But if I crank this all the way up, you can see how almost three-dimensional. And when I say crank this all the way up, I mean the micro contrast. This looks like that weird HDR effect that gets a very bad rap. And I'm not suggesting that anyone does this to their image, but just take a look at what it is doing to the image. Let me zoom in here a little bit. And I'll turn this off and turn it on. Look at how much detail is being brought out in the fine lines. Now, I think of this as how would I use dynamic contrast on an image? And this is what I'm comparing dynamic contrast to. If you're from Photo One, wow, on One Photo Raw, there we go. If you use that, then you know what I'm talking about when I say dynamic contrast as an effect or a filter. So this is my on one comparison, the micro contrast to the dynamic contrast. And then I have the fine contrast. And this does it at such a small level, it's almost hard to even tell. It's more of a perception that something was contrasted or separated. It just works so well. And I really, really enjoy using this tool because when you have a photo that could definitely use some contrast, like it starts to blotch up this little left side of the brick here, but down in the center of the photo, I actually like what it's doing. Now, I'm just going to dial this back and allow this photo to kind of breathe on its own. But the contrast tools here really do help make a three-dimensional look in a photo. And that's what I appreciate about using the contrast here. Now, you get a tone curve and you click on it, you can do normal tone curve stuff, right? So if I wanted to do an S curve, something like that to boost the contrast, and I'm darkening down the image. And this is one of the challenges I find with using this software. I don't think I need the tone curve when I have all of these other options available to me, because every time that I do my normal adjustments with the tone curve in Photolab 7, I find that I darken the photo further than what I want it to, and that's just not what I want in my life, right? Now, what is cool is I can still do like my fade adjustments that I normally do, and I can, do something like that where it looks a little bit more stylistic and faded. But I find that it's better for me to do those types of things inside of one of the Nick Collection plugins, because the way that it integrates with Photolab works out pretty decent. And I enjoy working through this process a little bit here. I think it could be a little bit better. I think it could be better or more improved, but I digress. And then I leave the vignetting on the auto with DxO optical corrections. One of the cool things about Photo Lab 7, I use too many programs. One of the best things about Photo Lab 7 is the fact that they give you these optical modules that are paired by camera and lens, and it makes it to where you get the best optical, not quality, that's not the word I want to use. Um, it fixes distortion. Now, this is a JPEG. I don't know how much of that distortion would have been in here. I find that that combination works better on DNG files and RAW files than it does on JPEGs, because most JPEGs, they have the correction baked into it also, straight from camera, especially if you're using a lens that is from the same manufacturer as your camera brand. So this is usually where a lot of people say, okay, this is why you want to shoot RAW, because of adjusting your tones. But I've just shown you that you can get some really good tonal adjustments using JPEGs if you exposed your photo properly. Now, I had half a mind of sharing a underexposed image, so you can see what I was talking about, but I think we know what underexposed images look like, and it all really comes down to what is it that you want to have in your overall image. Now, color is another thing. And I believe you can push color as much as you absolutely need to. Like if I move this color wheel around, I'm not being limited by color. So with a JPEG image, you can absolutely push the color however you want. And if I want this overall image to be a little bit warmer, warmer color tones, then I can just push that like so. You know, it's more of a stylistic choice to go something that looks like this. This is more of like that infrared type of lighting, and that's not something that I'm trying to do here. But if I want it to be a little bit more on the warm tone side, I could, kind of push this just a little bit in that direction. Now, if I need the photo to be more saturated, I can see that I don't really care for what it's doing down the column there, because I think I got the white balance the way that it needed to be. And that is the other challenge of photographing with a JPEG. You're not going to have the ability to really correct your white balance to the best of what you could do. You can see that there's like minor changes that are happening with the white balance here. You get a better white balance correction through using a RAW file. So I highly recommend using RAW files if you think that your white balance is going to be off. But in most cases, auto white balance is an amazing tool today, and it just works. Like, I don't know how else to say that. So if I pull up on the saturation, because I think that this can be saturated a little bit. Again, I'm not trying to make stylistic choices here. I think that we're better off sending our photos into one of the Nik Collection plugins, either Color Effects or Analog Effects, if you have that. Now, if you don't have that, then by all means, you're going to have to work here with it. But if you have it, then think of Photolab as your base editor, and then think of all of the other plugins, the Nik Collection, as like your creative styler. And that's the way I think you should look at pretty much every photo editing software. Maybe not Lightroom, because, I guess you would send things into Photoshop if you wanted to expand. You can get some good and very unique creative looks inside of Lightroom. But when I work inside of Photolab, I just think, how can I get this to a point where I can start to style it? And I don't make too many choices on what styles I want to apply in Photolab 7 particularly, or I don't commit to any styles inside of Photolab 7. with the exception of using the FilmPack, just because it's baked into uh, Photolab. And I've shown this in the past. Let me just pull this over here. I've shown this in the past, but maybe we want to go with something that it was in the 1990s. And I think that this is just really cool that you can kind of cycle through, like maybe this look, which doesn't really shine through as well. This look could be kind of cool for this image. Like these are the types of things that you may have to choose to bake in, because FilmPack is a part of Photolab when you have the two. You could send this obviously outside of Photolab and use FilmPack as a standalone, and you do get some really cool features and tools there. I'll do a video on that once I get a little bit more comfortable with working in there. But right now, the way that I'm using FilmPack 7 is just how I'm showing you. Like I just mess around and I see what works well. Like I really enjoy what this one is doing. So once I find my color, like it sets your color, your type, as well as your rendering. And this one has an intensity that seems to be about halfway. So, you can mess around with that. Now we're starting to get into the stylizing piece. And I think I didn't want to go that far into what I do with JPEGs. If that's something you want to see stylizing inside of Photolab 7 or even the Nick collection, just let me know and I can make that type of content. But what I'm noticing now is I'm losing detail in the shadows up here. So this is where, when I am making that style inside of Photolab 7, how do I incorporate or rebuild the areas that I lost? And this is where the local adjustment section comes in. So I'm just going to go ahead and use a point control here. And this is one of those things, it takes some getting used to. I'm going to be honest. If you're used to painting with a brush, there is that option. But when you get used to, or the way, DxO software has, and I don't know if it's DxO, but I'll say Nick Collection, Photolab, they use these little circle point controls or control points. And you have some control over how they impact the area. And I'll be honest, I'm still learning how to use these, which is why I said it takes some getting used to. Like, I'm trying to figure out how I can get this whole area, because think of it like a, not luminosity, what's the word I want to think? Like a gradient. And I seem to have to put a lot of these little points just to select the area that I want to. And what you do is once you have it selected, I can pull up on my shadows or pull up on whatever area that you wanted to work with. So I'm starting to get that detail back. Now, I probably wouldn't do a crazy harsh adjustment here. And I got to move these around to get to the areas of this particular ceiling, if you will, the way that I want to see everything. Now, one of the annoying things is you have to hit close so that way you can actually see what you're editing. But once you hit close, you can turn the adjustments off and on. And you can see that that works pretty well. And then I can do the same thing again. Just grab my control point one more time and I'm gonna hit new. So that way I'm creating a new adjustment. And this time I'm gonna try and hit up just this little banister here, or this this column, if you will. And you gotta play with this. I wish it were a little bit easier, And I know there's a ton of videos on YouTube showing how to use this tool. Um, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time trying to explain it because I'm probably not the person you would want having explained this particular tool, but same idea here. I should be able to pull up on my shadows and just soften that dark area after I've added in that film adjustment. And think of this as like dodging and burning. Now, I don't really care for what it's doing there just because it was given this weird discoloration, but this is one of those things that you can absolutely do with your JPEG images. Now, the last thing that I'll probably showcase with the local adjustment section is, let's say you wanted to do just a little bit of stylizing or maybe some color separation, correction, whatever it may be. This tree in the background is a prime candidate for some color adjustment. All right. Now, one of the cool things here is you get an HSL along with masking capabilities. So if I move this around, you can see how I am manipulating that tree in the background. But if I come to my greens, I can saturate them, bring up the luminance, come to my yellows, and I'll saturate those as well, bring up the luminance, and then I can spread out the blend for that area. Now, I still have access to all of my other controls, and this is fairly similar to what you get in Lightroom when you have your exposure and contrast and everything like that. And I get this micro contrast slider, which I told you I enjoyed using previously. Sorry, realized I was out of the circle, or kind of out of the circle. I told you I used this previously, and you can really see how that just impacts that tree area. It's brighter, it's a little bit more prominent, maybe too bright now. So I can pull down on this opacity. And this is something that is very familiar to most of the users on this channel. And, you know, I am using the opacity slider in on one. That's what I meant by familiar to most of the users on this channel, just to be clear. But I really like what I'm getting here. And, you know, the sky, there's no detail in the sky. So maybe that would be something worth modifying just a little bit. So let's go ahead and maybe we'll try this one. I'll just go here, and that didn't work. So we will delete that one, and we'll try luminosity. So we'll click here. There we go. So that time we got the sky, and I'm just going to go ahead and pull down on the exposure just a touch, but it's not going to let me fade it. What I would like to have done is put a gradient. I'm still learning how to use the software, but I'm just really enjoying using the software overall. So here is what we came into the editing bay with, and here's what I would send into my photo correction, or I'm sorry, my photo stylizing workspace, be it Nik Collection, Photoshop, Affinity Photo, doesn't matter. On one even, I could send this to on one, and I've demonstrated that in the past. And I could go ahead and start working on stylizing because I've got the tone and color and the base edit, if you will, ready to go. And I like what I have here, you know, compared to what I came in with, which was a little flat. It was dark, muddy, desaturated almost. And now I have a more lively image that I think was more representative of the day and would be something I would share. So there we go. So there you have the working with a JPEG you can absolutely do it. You just got to be careful with what you're doing with your JPEGs as far as, are you pushing the exposure? You seen when I moved the smart lighting, I started to get those artifacts in the shadows, because that's typically where your artifacts are going to live, in the shadows. Now, if you are getting good exposure out of camera, you can almost take your JPEGs and start to deliver those. And this is one of the things that I started out in photography with, was shooting just JPEGs. And that's kind of why I wanted to do this particular live stream, because over the years I've adapted to shooting JPEG and RAW. However, I hear so many people, they're like, I have to shoot in RAW. You have to shoot in RAW. And I'm not a naysayer to that. Hopefully my message has been consistent on RAW versus JPEG here on this channel. I'm not a naysayer to anyone who decides to shoot in RAW only. But if you need the time and you want to save some space on your hard drive, it might be worthwhile to shoot in JPEG. And I'm not saying shoot in JPEG only. You could. I think that that would be actually a really good challenge, to photograph in JPEG only and then take that into the editing bay and figure out what you can do, because you truly don't understand limitations if all you're working on is a raw image. But then you'll find that maybe you'll get better edits, or edits that you prefer, when you work off of a JPEG, because some decisions are already made for you that you are okay with the camera making for you. And I'm not trying to encourage anyone to allow the camera to make all the decisions. All I'm saying is, I find that the JPEGs I get out of my Canon EOS R6 and my EOS R, those JPEGs are phenomenal out of camera, as long as I get my exposure correct. Now, if I don't have my exposure correct, it's good to have that raw file so that way I can recover it. But I recently photographed a family over the weekend, and I delivered JPEGs. I edited JPEGs and I delivered JPEGs. Now, the family doesn't know, and that's neither here nor there. All they seen was the final result, and the final result was consistent with what I would have done, maybe even better, if I'm being honest, than if I had to edit just a raw file, because the JPEG had a lot of information baked into it. The contrast, the colors, everything that I wanted to see in the image was already there. So all I had to do was really clean up some of the lighting, like I did here, and send that off. And then it was delivered, and they accepted them, and they were extremely happy and thankful for the files that I provided. So don't discredit JPEGs. Keep that in mind, and work with whatever makes you feel the most comfortable. Hopefully there is some value in there. I know I kind of went on a rant at the end, but if you want to pick up Photolab 7, consider using the affiliate link down in the description box below. I want to say thank you again to everyone who hit that subscribe button, and you guys come back here and you support this channel by leaving comments and just sharing your thoughts with me, because again, I don't know everything, but I do truly appreciate it. So with that, I want to say until next time, I want you guys to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.